This is a Security Weekly production. Cyber deception comes to Defcon and IoT. Cisco makes a push for voice over Wi-Fi. Sumo Logic monitors your Lambdas. And identity management integrates with SIM. All that and more, so stay tuned. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly. This is episode 5. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. Live on the lines via Skype from South Dakota. Mr. John Strand is with us. Welcome, John.
Hello, hello, hello. Just hanging out in South Dakota in the Black Hills Information Security bunker as we're waiting for the massive thunderstorm to roll over us. So Excellent. If you hear a train in the background, don't worry. It's just a tornado destroying the building that I'm in.
Excellent. Or not so excellent, I guess.
No. Well, you're not here, so you're like, that's funny.
That's great. Hopefully you have a secure bunker that you can...
Oh, yeah. We've got that covered. Well,
we need those employees, so make sure that they stay safe. I mean, along with you and your family, but we need the programmers because they're important.
Paul knows who's expendable. It's like, we can replace John with his brother, who's a younger model.
Yeah, no one would even know the difference.
One would know. So.
Oh, boy. Some interesting enterprise security news this week. Let's see. Apptelligent.
I called it APT-get intelligence.
Yes. Apptelligent receives Splunk certification. Not really security, but essentially Apptelligent monitors your mobile apps primarily for crashing and reports that now back to Splunk, which is kind of interesting. Could this be an indication of mobile compromise or more likely a crappy app? Because we all know there's no shortage of those.
When I read this, the first thing that popped in my mind was, oh my God, these guys learned how to use syslog. But no, it looks like they have an entire dashboard and everything set up for it. Now, is this that big of a deal for companies? Just out of curiosity, just kind of throwing it to you that they're really worried about looking at the performance and crashing of their applications. Like I can imagine fleet management, like if you have a fleet of snowplows and you have an app that's tracking where your snowplows are. I guess if that app crashes, that matters. But I don't know. Is there a huge market for this, for tracking mobile apps and their performance?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, I suppose you could do some security monitoring too. You're probably better off with Mobile Iron or one of those vendors if you really want to do security. And an integration with that maybe into Splunk would be interesting from a security perspective. I do think we're still young on the scale of mobile security. I still think there's like a next evolution of securing your mobile devices. And in fact, there's another story that makes me think that's even more imminent as Cisco pushes for voice over Wi-Fi. And this was like a dream when Wi-Fi first came out. We're like, well, why not use our voice? Well, because my connection doesn't last at all and the latency is so bad that it's unusable. But now that Wi-Fi is like all fast and stuff, and they state some scary things now that they want to do this. Here we see Wi-Fi calling has some benefits over the alternative licensed propositions in terms of being able to serve all the users, all the visitors to a particular venue, irrespective of their affiliated carrier. So this basically means anyone that shows up on my site can jump on the Wi-Fi and make calls because no one's going to snoop that, right?
I honestly, that's not going to be sniffed at all. So if we look at traditional voice over IP technologies, if you screw up in the configuration, a lot of the voice over IP architectures will default back to unencrypted. Like if you don't set it up correctly, it finds a way that it's going to work, right? You're going to try to negotiate the protocols between the devices and the centralized voice over IP server. And if it can't figure it out, it's like sending it unencrypted. So that's one of my concerns. Number two, so whenever I was looking at this, Paul, is this quickly becoming a dead horse? Like the idea of telephony and call systems and things like that, just simply because I do all of my stuff through my cell phone. And almost everybody that works in corporate America has a cell phone. I very rarely see people sitting at their desks. I can see this for like help desk or call support, but by and large, most people are just using voice over LTE if they actually want to switch over to that type of protocol, which actually works really well on my phone. So I don't know if this is just kind of a revisiting of an old technology, or do you think that there's actually a place for like wireless handsets in corporate America in 5 to 10 years from now?
Yeah, I mean, most of the time in an organization, I mean, you do have some kind of cellular connectivity. I guess there are places where that can be greatly limited. I mean, how many buildings do you go in, John, when you visit a company or whatever, and your cell phone, you have a tough time getting coverage? I mean, it happens less and less, but it's still an issue. So I kind of foresee a lot of organizations just not letting people have a desk phone, or just not maintaining that infrastructure anymore. And basically your phone system just ties into something on your smartphone. It's an app, it connects over Wi-Fi, and it rings your extension and all that stuff. I can totally see that happening. That technology more than likely already exists today. In fact, I can remember in 2001 or whatever, even before that, having my desk phone forward to my cell phone, which can be annoying or it can be a convenience, I guess, really depending on who's calling and how frequent. But I can see this replacing the traditional phone system. Is that a good thing, a bad thing? There's probably people doing it, but I don't know. I think it's kind of like a double-edged sword.
Yeah, and I think that the main goal of what they're trying to get at is that wireless workplace, right? We don't have Cat6 cable ran absolutely everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
But I honestly, going back to the idea, I can't see any builder today building a building without running Cat6 jacks
right.
every place. I mean, I can't seem to no, we're doing Wi-Fi. That's a bad building decision.
Yeah,
right there.
No, I agree. Yeah, so kind of interesting. Well, Cisco's, of course, pushing it because they have been selling voice over IP equipment since the beginning of time. So,
Yep.
Let's see, where were we? Another cyber deception company touts the ability to catch the attackers. I think this one's Topspin. Have you heard of Topspin?
I have, absolutely.
Okay, so Topspin, I guess they made a press release that their founder and CEO, perhaps, was accepted to speak at DEFCON. So,
which is cool. That's
cool.
Freaking great.
No,
so Paul, when we first started doing talks at RSA and stuff about cyber deception, active defense, offensive countermeasures, exactly how many talks were on that topic back in the day?
Yeah, like maybe one or two other ones. Frequently, we were the only ones talking about that topic. And frequently, people wanted to throw things at us because we were talking about hacking back. And hacking back is really bad. Yeah.
So okay. So with this, I think it's great. Once again, there's another vendor in the area that's doing this. I would like to see a cyber deception vendor take off, just to prove that it's viable. But we haven't seen a lot of honeypot vendors take off. And once again, throw a shout out to our good friends. It's Metria at Agati Ebron and them. Mm-hmm. They have a good product. And I just got done talking with them. They're going to release a community edition that's free that does this type of cyber deception. So they're going to be releasing that here shortly. So there's a lot of products out there for people to play with. You got to get out there and play with them. I think it's cool, but I still think the jury's out as to whether or not these are going to be products that are purchased in mass for most corporations.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. There's another vendor along these lines, Ativo Networks. Have you heard of Ativo before?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I have.
So Ativo, they've got this. Listen to this was the title of their press release. Ativo Networks provides first deception-based threat detection platform for Internet of Things IoT / detection platform, addresses gaps in IoT security with real-time threat detection and attack forensics for accelerated incident response. Wow! That is the biggest mouthful of a press release title that we've ever covered.
I think that what I'm learning from doing this podcast with you, Paul, is that the people that write these are clearly insane. Mm-hmm. Is that all one sentence? If I remember reading it, it was one massive run-on sentence with almost every conceivable buzzword in it.
Yes. Really what that whole sentence means is they have an IoT honeypot. That's really what it means. Now, going off on that point, I think that's cool, perhaps a really good application for honeypots, as a lot of the IoT and SCADA devices are more tightly controlled devices, are more tightly controlled networks, allow you to finely tune your honeypot. In other words, the chances of a user, I think, stumbling across that honeypot's probably pretty low. The like things that are anomalies are much greater and easier to detect because it's a device. It has an Ethernet connection. It accepts a couple of commands and like flips a switch, or like it's an IoT device and it sends this specific traffic because its specific purpose is to control a lock, a door, a window, whatever it happens to be. So I think it's really cool in terms of IoT honeypots. It's a cool concept.
I think it is too. And the only place that I can really see something like this just taking off is for like an IoT honeypot network is like a SCADA PLC environment.
Yeah.
Where you can create a fake SCADA environment and then watch to see if anything touches it in the hopes that they won't find your real SCADA environment as well.
Right. Yeah, I do think that's pretty cool. Let's see. The CyberArk. CyberArk integrates with the SIM solution. So you can track credentials used in your identity management system and reports those anomalies to the SIM. Now, it's not a bad idea for this integration. However, I'd really like to see this baked in. If identity management products can track your credentials being used in trust relationships, can't they be configured to both detect anomalies and then both like prevent it as well? If they could, would that make pen testing harder? I don't know.
Yes.
Those are questions.
In fact, in Boston, the fine folks behind PowerShell Empire, I think it was it Source Boston that was last week? I think it was Source. They gave a great presentation about what stops them at Verus Group in being effective in their penetration tests. And one of the products they talked about was CyberArk being a very, very solid product. They're looking at that abuse of identity, being used in multiple different computer systems. But once again, like a lot of this stuff, whenever I'm reading CyberArk, that integrates with your SIM, I seriously think this is just basically a press release that says, hey, our product supports syslog.
Right.
Or, hey, our product now has an API that you can program and query to generate alerts, which is fine. But you're absolutely right. They should be alerting on it. And yeah, they should go the next step and actually shutting down that account that is behaving poorly.
Yeah, I truly believe that most people view identity management as not sexy. But there are some companies, in a small number of companies, and I could be mistaken, I can think of 4, and I learned about a new one today. So we have CyberArk, Lieberman, Thycotic, and the new one is Ping, who just won an award that I put in the notes. And they're all in the identity management space. And I think it's something, as John and I sit here and say, yes, that would slow us down or even stop us on a pen test potentially, and have someone else verify that point as well. I think it should be things that people need to be looking into. But again, it's not as sexy as the next generation real-time threat detection and attack forensics with accelerated incident response, right? I mean, it's identity management.
Well, and it's really, those products are all about targeting the next generation APTs, to be completely blunt.
Yes.
But you mentioned Ping, and that's a good article as well. And I've had personal experience with Ping, and they're just a fantastic company. This isn't just marketing propaganda or spin. I've had nothing but good luck with them in the projects that I worked on with Northrop Grumman and a couple of other projects. They're just a very, very solid identity and access management provider. Now, they look more expensive per hour, but they come in and they get the job done. They get the job done right and quickly, and then they get the hell out, which is awesome.
So AWS Lambda. Just want to, Amazon has a lot of applications in the cloud. AWS Lambda lets you run code without provisioning or managing servers. You pay only for the compute time you consume. There is no charge when your code is not running. With Lambda, you can run code for virtually any type of application or back-end service with zero administration.
So this is important really important for a whole bunch of reasons. I can't remember all the code bases that they support, but I know that Python and Java is in there. But what you can do is you can upload your code, and as it's needed, it spins up an instance that runs your code, and then it shuts itself down. It's kind of like an autoscale group, but specifically for application sets. And this is getting into how the cloud is fundamentally shifting the way that we look at computing. A lot of people think cloud computing is spinning up a bunch of virtual machines, computer systems that have an entire stack of Windows or Linux running in the cloud, and they do app stuff. And that's not how Amazon's doing it. What they're doing is they're actually spinning up these services like Lambda and Kinesis and S3 and those types of things, where they provide a database. It's not that it's an operating system that's running a database that you run. No. You use the entire database instance. And Lambda allows you to move your entire code base into the cloud then as well. In fact, we were talking with Rich Mogul about this, and in a lot of ways, if you're developing an application or a platform, it's possible to do very, very little coding at all, because most of the components to actually make all these things talk to each other are already created by Amazon. And Lambda is a huge step in that direction, where now if you have a code that does something, let's say analyzing star patterns, and say lights of wavelength coming off of the stars, whatever, you can spin it up and it'll run that application, but then it shuts itself down once it's done. So you're not paying for that tremendous amount of overhead and keeping that AMI running all the time.
Does it help with security? I mean, I suppose in some cases it does. I'm more concerned with, okay, I wrote this application and it's running. Like, what happens when Amazon updates something? Does that affect my code?
It possibly can, most likely not. But it's just like anything in the cloud; they can break stuff, and it does happen from time to time. But I don't think that that's going to be that big of a concern. It'd be more of a concern, to be honest, in Java than anything else.
Yeah.
But one of the things I like about it is I think it actually helps security, because complexity is a huge enemy of security. And if Amazon is already handling all the connective tissue, if it's handling like Kinesis for data ingestion and loading data into like something like S3, they handle all that for you. Then there's fewer layers that are actually there for you to screw up. And you can just focus on writing your code, and then all the other crap that's around it is abstracted from you. But you do have to trust the fact that Amazon has super security ninjas in the background locking that stuff down.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's almost like you're outsourcing the security of your application at that point, other than the security of the actual application itself, which I think is a good thing. I think a lot of times when we see security problems, it's because the team has built everything from scratch. So they've got the application, they've got the web server, they've got the application server, they've got the database and the operating systems underneath all of them. And that's a lot of stuff to secure. You're basically outsourcing all of that and trusting that Amazon's going to do a good job of security.
Yep, absolutely.
And Sumo Logic can now monitor these applications. So Sumo Logic lets you monitor all of your applications in the cloud. It now supports AWS Lambda. So here's another shift in security. Okay, so I'm basically outsourcing all this stuff, but I still want insight and monitoring as much as I can. And all of these new cloud security companies, newer cloud security companies are emerging to let you do just that. I was speaking to a vendor the other day that was like, we take antivirus and we put it in the cloud. We take your firewall and we put it in the cloud. You find your security solution that you're using and we're going to apply it to the cloud. So a lot of these security products and solutions are also moving into the cloud.
Well, and there's a couple of reasons for that that actually tie directly into security in weird ways. So one of the problems you run into whenever you're moving stuff to the cloud is you're getting further and further away from your technology, which is good and it's bad. But it's bad from the perspective of if you have something that's not configured properly, or it's all of a sudden compromised and it starts generating a lot of traffic and a lot of CPU cycles, then you can end up being burned very, very, very quickly for a lot of money. I'll give you an example. A couple of weeks ago, there was that NTP amplification DDoS attack that was going around the internet. And we had a server here at the Black Hills Information Security offices in Rapid, and one of our servers was running NTP, and it was vulnerable to that attack. Now, it didn't get popped. It's not like they got shell, but they were bouncing NTP requests off of the server, and there was an amplification attack to DDoS other sites. Now, the amount of bandwidth that we generated, I think we caught it like in 15, 20 minutes, but the amount of bandwidth that we generated would have cost us thousands of dollars if we were running something in Amazon, because it was just a tremendous amount of bandwidth that was being utilized. So these products are awesome because you can manage that performance, and if certain clipping thresholds are met, you can get some alerting and you can react to it as well.
Yeah, and Sumo Logic is used to control costs in the cloud too, which is important, as we know, from creating offensive countermeasures and starting to put our products in the cloud.
Yes, exactly.
So let's talk about SIM. And I put SIM in quotes because I don't think it's a very good term. And I think we're probably going to have to do multiple segments on SIM. And basically the foundation for this, actually I worked with some really smart people when I used to work at Tenable. And I think it was Matt Alderman that was describing to me, SIM's really, he's like, it's really like 4 different things. And a lot of people just blanket umbrella call it SIM, and Gartner creates a magic quadrant. So we just all call it SIM, and we lump it in there and we stare at the magic quadrant and we go by the thing that's in the upper rightmost corner. And It's not necessarily how we should approach SIM. There's all these different facets of SIM. And I was describing earlier to someone that most people that I talk with are like, yeah, we have a SIM. We got like that thing over there that collects all the logs. And then we got this other thing from a different vendor that helps us analyze the logs, but we still can't detect when attacks are happening on our network. So like they're talking to offensive countermeasures, John and I, and saying, we need one of your products, AI Hunter, to help us detect attacks, right? There's a product plug right in the discussion. But I mean, that's essentially why this threat hunting market is emerging, I think, largely because of people in that situation. They're like, well, I'm collecting all these logs, but I really can't figure out what to do with them. And that's where I think SIM has fallen down. And there are other areas of SIM that I think if we split it up, you would be able to make better decisions about what technology you want to acquire. Because what are your goals? What are you trying to accomplish by doing anything with logs?
Yeah, and it's kind of sad because whenever you start looking at Microsoft Advanced Threat Analytics, or you start looking at Rapid7 User Insight, there's a bunch of other user behavioral analytics products. We talked about CyberArk here as well. But when you start looking at these products, a lot of them are basically riding on top of SIMs, and they're trying to accommodate the inherent failings of the SIM itself. And I wonder how much of this is based out of, basically Splunk and ArcSight and these massive vendors that just haven't done that good of a job at helping their customers tune or creating the right rules or creating the right profiles to be able to detect these attacks.
Well, and as you stated, John, there's so many different log formats. And I mean, I saw that and worked at Tenable too, is we had this SIM-like product as well. There's so many different formats, and you have to write something to handle each format, and every format is different. So you basically have to build your own language to interpret all of these logs, and that's hard. Then you have the complexity from the user side. So you have to build an interface that lets you weed through all of those logs, and it's hard. And I think a lot of vendors like Logarithm and some of these other more security analytics companies have tried to focus in on specific verticals within SIM. Like you mentioned User Insight, which I think is Insight IDR, something like that.
I think it is IDR. Yeah.
And so it's just looking at user traffic, right? Like it doesn't care about a lot of that other stuff. It's just focusing on the user. So you've got now stuff that monitors just the user, and then you've got something like Logarithm, which can really go in and is really trying to focus on finding like the bad things and not so much the gigantic SIM thing. So I like a lot of these verticals that are being created, but at what point now you're running 4 SIMs? Like now, what do you do?
Well, and that's one of the things that that is whenever we're talking about AI Hunter or anything that we're working with. Once again, we have people that are like, "Well, can this integrate with our existing SIM?" And it's almost as though a lot of organizations have said, "I've spent $250,000 on this product, and it doesn't work. I'm going to keep throwing money into that product in the hopes that maybe at $500,000, I'll finally be able to get it to work properly." And it's very hard to let some of these legacy technologies go because they've been so ingrained for so long. They've been so dysfunctional for so long that we somehow believe that they're going to work because the conventional wisdom says that this is what you have to run. When we look at the Verizon data breach reports with the chart that you and I talk about all the time with our customers, detection method SIM is 1% or less of the detects of attacks or letting people know that they've actually been compromised. That shows that the technology, the way it's being utilized, is fundamentally flawed. It's not an issue of a good amount of money will all of a sudden increase it. Let's say you put in $500,000 and then it doubles. Well, congratulations, you're now at 2% detection. So the approach itself is flawed. And I think that what's going to happen is a lot of these SIM platforms are merely going to become platforms collecting and aggregating data where other applications are doing heuristic analysis to go through and try and identify patterns of user accounts behaving badly, services being created or destroyed, to actually start doing what the SIM should have done 5-10 years ago.
Yeah. And I think that it's really hard to use a SIM and look at data in a different way in terms of, I think it's easier to look at your systems connecting out to the internet. And so you're kind of like just focus on that set of data. But I think it's more difficult to look at lateral movement from a SIM's perspective because you have so much more data to sift through, and there's so much legitimate activity in that arena that picking out the bad stuff can be extremely difficult.
Yeah, and that is the place where a lot of these guys are actually sitting right now, is trying to detect that lateral movement. But it's still it's tough, right? Because you're trying to look for that user account ID that is now accessing multiple computer systems, and you're all of a sudden starting to need a lot more CPU horsepower. Where a lot of the horsepower that was being used in the past was just collecting the logs and then dropping them into a database with a handful of rules. Now these rules are getting inherently more complex for looking at the behavioral analysis of an account. So it's definitely a scaling issue. But I think that we're moving in the right direction. I
Hmm.
think it's a step in the right direction. I think the way that we were doing SIM 3 years ago was broken. Finally, people realized it was broken, and they started looking for better solutions to try to address it.
Yeah, I also think with SIM too, some of the problem is what logs do you enable on your systems? Like what logs do you enable in Windows? And if you don't have someone focused on tuning the configuration of all of your systems to send the appropriate logs, and then once you do that, now you've doubled your data. And then you have to go to your SIM and tune it to look for that pattern of behavior. I always go back to Michael Goff at Malware Archaeology, where he says, go into Windows and turn on all these things, and then go into Splunk and configure all these things to detect all those things. It's malwarearchaeology.org. And he actually keeps that pretty well updated. I find that a lot of people don't do that because it's a lot of work. And if you've got 20,000 or 100,000 systems, that's a whole, like you comes back to your point, John, of horsepower.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you brought up malware archaeology. That is a great site. And the fundamental question that is being asked and answered at sites like that, and this is the same thing that Binary Defense is doing with Dave Kennedy, is basically looking at how attacks actually work, how they actually play, and then kind of doing that stimulus response and trying to write the proper signatures for those types of attacks, which
Right.
is really what indicators of compromise on a kind of a enterprise scale should have been. But going back to it, we asked that question and maybe I should do. I'm going to do a survey after this, and I'll put it out online. But of all of the event IDs that organizations collect, take all of the unique event IDs, like you got 512, 624s, all these different event IDs for Windows, all these different event IDs that come in for your Apache web server, and so on. What percentage of those actually have signature and analysis plugins written for them, or signature rules written for them? And by and large, we're finding out that like it's less than 10%. So that's like 90% of the event logs that you're loading into your SIM are event IDs and little events that there's nothing that is ever going to look at or analyze them at all. And I think that that is an interesting approach because when you start doing malware archaeology, then you're playing the game of let's actually watch things that are directly applicable to attacks. Now, people would argue, they would say, well, the attacker then would avoid those things. But you have to understand that that's a lot harder than it sounds.
Mm. Yeah, I think you're right. I think traditionally we've tried to collect everything. And
Mhm.
I think today, and, I interviewed someone who did, I don't know if he still does, but was doing security for Microsoft. Essentially described the same approach as malware archaeology that said we just look at these very focused things. Like we understand that the majority of malware on a Windows system is going to trigger these types of behavior. So we configure our systems to log that behavior. Then we configure our SIM or security analytics, threat analytics, whatever you want to call it, to look for that behavior. And that's a win for everyone. And that is a strategy which I wish more people would employ. But I think we get stuck with just collecting everything and having a difficult time configuring these products to do what they do because it is a very complex activity.
Very cool.
Um, what else on SIM? Yeah, I wanted to thank SIM actually for not providing enough security so that other vendors like offensive countermeasures can be in the market with products that can help people detect things. I mean, and I think the other thing that really complicates SIM is the rate at which new applications and systems can be created. I mean, we just talked about Amazon Lambda. I mean, here the application can just appear and then go away, and systems can appear and go away. So being able to monitor and track in today's world of virtualization and cloud is even more difficult because now there's no, like, I feel like before you had a rack of systems and they all log stuff and you could try and get a handle on it. But today things are so dynamic that we have to go to other places outside of traditional SIM to do security.
Mhm. And once again, I don't understand how come ArcSight and these other companies. ArcSight lost a whole bunch of their employees, and they want to start another company to do this stuff. How come these SIM vendors aren't stepping up and doing this? It seems like it should be relatively easy for them to do it, and I have no idea. And I think it may be the reason is the people that are kind of holding the strings for research and development are very tightly coupled with sales. I mean, this is one of those things that Ron Gula always talked about anytime that we all got together. He said it's very hard to have your research and development and your software development, a company like Tenable or any company, not be completely driven by the sales team. If you have the sales team starting to drive that, then it means that your product is going to go to a quick death. And I think that that's what we're seeing with a lot of these large scale companies. The sales team is what's driving the software development cycles. And they're trying to not shake the trees because the sales team doesn't understand the new ideas. They don't understand the new concepts. So it's difficult for them to sell those concepts. So it just kind of becomes this self-defeating spiral after a while.
Yeah, and
but no, I would hope that some of the large vendors would do that.
The sales team is probably pushing, if I were to guess, to support new log formats. Oh, we're getting, big deal on the table. We want to win this deal, but they want us to support SAP or whatever, some weird SAP application, and that's where research and development is being spent.
Yep, absolutely.
So, what do you do today if you're going to go find a SIM? I mean, logs are still. We're not telling people to throw logs away, right? Send them to dev null. A lot of us would like that, I think, but.
I would start with, to be honest, I would start with something like malware archaeology and start looking at some key event IDs. There's like 10, 12 of them. If you go to tinyurl.com/504-extra, that's tinyurl.com/504-extra, singular. There's a PowerShell script called critical events.ps1. And in there, it has the critical event IDs. So whenever we're doing incident response, one of the things that we'll do is run that script to see if that system has started a new service, spawned a new service, destroyed a new service. And that's just an example of the services. But you can look at those event IDs, and those are the ones that are usually associated with compromise and malware being injected into memory on the computer system. And by the way, full disclosure, that comes from Seth Meisner and Eric Conrad's class, Continuous Monitoring 511 at SAM. So it's a really, really great class. But that script is from there. And you can start looking at it in a different perspective. Instead of log everything about ArcSight sorted out, try to go to malware archaeology and come up with an approach of the event IDs that you're actually going to watch. Look at Insight, IDR from Rapid7 or Microsoft Advanced Threat Analytics, and start monitoring your systems in that perspective. Or maybe, Security Center did a lot of ingesting of logs, and they had a fundamentally different approach to looking at event logs. So the point is, look at more of the heuristic pattern-based detection methods rather than just log absolutely everything. I think that's where you have to start today.
No, I agree, and I think every company I speak with has a slightly different approach, which is sometimes, I think it's a good thing because everyone's environment is different. Sometimes I feel like a lot of people are trying to reinvent the wheel, but also a lot of that can be based on what talent that you have in-house. I know a lot of places would take vulnerability data, for example, and put it in a system like Archer, or have some system that collects logs and security events and correlates them together. Some are written in-house, some are, written off of a SIM. I mean, it takes a long time to get a big SIM off the ground, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, as long as, and I think what people kind of lose sight of is, most people have like a checklist, like, oh, I got to have a SIM, got to have a firewall, got to have antivirus, got to have a vulnerability scanner, right? And it's not about going through a checklist and making sure you have all these things. It's about how do these things work together to accomplish your goals? Like, what are your goals? One of your goals should be making sure that everything is patched and doesn't have security vulnerabilities. Another goal should be find attackers in the network. The other thing should be, find things that fall outside of the scope of those two things in terms of security events, and figure out which ones are most important to you and you want to build a process around. And also define where all your data is and all your sensitive systems are and who the owner is. Those got to do all that first before you start going through a checklist of, what solutions you're going to acquire.
And I also think that organizations that are just starting the stuff up shouldn't be afraid of new technologies. If there's a new conceptual technology that's out there, there's a new product, a new vendor that is taking a novel and interesting approach to a problem, you shouldn't be afraid of that. Actually embrace it. And the reason why is all the old technologies aren't working.
Yeah.
So you can't do worse than 1% detection, as most of your individual security technologies are. So why not try something new and try a different approach?
And it's interesting. There's so many new vendors out there, even in just this space we call SIM. And I love Grifter's analogy. I'm going to go back to that Security Weekly episode 4 something. Hold on, I'll get it. We interviewed Grifter and 465, and Grifter said, when I talk about vendor space, I put up a slide and it has a kid's crossbow, a kid's bow and arrow, right, with the foam darts or those sticky ones, and it's a plastic thing. And then on the other side, it's got this really nice compound bow that you can use to take down big game with. And he goes, this is a representation and everything in between of security vendors. And he's like, we have a bow and arrow, but there's a lot of differences between the bow and arrows out there. And there's a lot of differences between security vendors. So you have to have a process when we talk about, hey, what SIM do I choose? You have to have a good process for selecting a security vendor. And that might be a topic for a completely separate show that we focus on. What do you talk about in general when you're evaluating a security vendor? So,
yes, it could be how to make your security vendor cry.
Yes. Yes. And having been on both sides of the fence gives me a unique perspective of that as well.
Yeah. Well, and I don't think we get that rattled anymore. I don't get rattled anymore either. I used to try and rattle people when I was on the defender side, and I remember when I worked at university, they would just shred vendors, and the ones that would survive the shredding would be the ones that we would pick, and that's certainly one approach. But I think there's some more accurate ways to determine the right solutions for you rather than just shredding essentially. You remember years ago at the Louisville, Kentucky ISSA meeting, we were out at Churchill Downs, and there was a whole bunch of vendors that paid, and a lot of big name vendors. And there was this little upstart company named FireEye, and and I was walking around.
I wish at that time we both had our checkbooks and invested, right?
Oh yeah, here, take all of my money, just take it now. But I remember going around to all the vendors, and my presentation was AV bypass. And we had Symantec and McAfee and a couple of other AV vendors that were there, and they got mad at the conference. They're like, "How come you put that jackass up that basically talked about how to bypass our product?" But and you even stepped away from it because we're going through all the vendors and we're at the FireEye table, and I'm asking Alex all these really hard questions. I don't even think he's with the company anymore.
Yeah, it was Alex Landstein was the technical person at FireEye at the time.
Dude, and he was knocking it out of the park.
He was the only one. I mean, all the other vendors just they wanted to cry. I was embarrassed, but they didn't. When I get up on stage, we destroyed the AV vendors, and I said, "There's one vendor that we could ask questions to, and they could answer them, and that's FireEye. You need to go talk to that vendor and purchase their product." And that was a long time ago. Well, that was before a lot of people had even heard of FireEye.
Oh yeah, they were just getting started. But that was I was a jackass. Yeah, I was kind of an asshole. And one of the things that we're learning is if you're going to send salespeople on the floor of a showroom at RSA or a SANS conference, someplace like that, then you darn well better send people that can answer questions. Because the people in this industry, a lot of the tech people are pretty sharp, and they're going to come with some difficult questions.
Now, we won't record it, but John and I will both be at Black Hat, and you have to promise me that we'll make time to go do the same thing.
We might record it. I don't know how... Ping's not running it anymore. I'm sure that Ping would have absolutely no problem with us recording shredding vendors.
Yes. We'd only be able to air the ones that we actually liked. How's that?
Yeah, UBM or UMB, whoever runs it now, probably might not like that very much.
Yeah, but no, we're totally going to do that and report back on the show, I think, of vendors that caught our attention and maybe some vendors that have some work to do or just didn't send their technical people to the show, which is just kind of embarrassing.
And let's be honest, we're going to be a vendor at the booth at Black Hat. So come by and shred us.
You can come by and shred us. This is true. Yeah, we'll have a booth. We're in the innovation area at Black Hat. John and I will both be there representing offensive countermeasures. We'll have product demos for both of our products, and it'll be a lot of fun. I'm sure we're going to see a lot of listeners of the show, a lot of friends of John and I, and some new people too, who hopefully will ask us the hard questions.
Yep, absolutely.
Excellent. Well, that concludes this edition of Enterprise Security Weekly. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Thanks for all of your positive feedback on social media. People really like the show, which makes me feel good. And we will see everyone next week, provided my wife doesn't give birth anytime soon. So that's an unknown. But you can find links to subscribe to this show at securityweekly.com/subscribe. Go there and subscribe to all our shows. Thanks for watching.